title of my message today is Conversations from the Grave. And so, well, I'm actually going to read to you from a book that has just as equally as a catchy title as that. But I want to really discuss that just like last week when we looked at Jesus and we said, Jesus, why did you have these conversations from the cross? Why, when every breath hurt, did you say these things to us when you were lifted on high? And so we looked at really the essential things that we should get from the conversation from the cross is that Jesus calls us into relationship. He calls us into relationship with God through himself, and he calls us into relationship with each other, with him being that center binding thread. And that's essentially the conversation from the cross. It is an invitation to be in relationship with Jesus and with one another. And so I want to then just look at, because it's not enough that he died on the cross. And I know that sounds harsh, but that was to make a way for forgiveness. But it is the resurrection. It is when he conquers death that we then come into the fullness. It is for freedom that he set us free. And so we come into life and life to the full. And so I'm interested what conversations happened around the grave. What conversations happened around the tomb? And so a very dear friend of mine has been very patient with me. And the last 2 weeks, we have been going through the scriptures. And we've been looking at the 4 Gospels. There are 4 books in the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We call them the Gospels. And in each one of these 4 books, the account of what happened at the tomb is captured. But because they're writing for different audiences, and also what they want to say is slightly that they add, well, they all agree on the main things, but they add extras based on the audience that they were writing for. Some were writing for the Romans, some were writing for the Greeks, and some for the Jews. And so we're going to really unpack John's book because John really captures the most detail of what happens at the tomb. Are you ready? You comfy? So what we've done is we have taken all these puzzle pieces, all the different things that were captured in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we have put them together to tell you the whole story. Because I don't know if you're like me, but I don't want to miss out on a catch up. No. Right, pause it, because I don't want to miss a detail. So what we've done is we have put in all 4 accounts with all their different details and perspectives so that we get this whole view of what has happened at the cross. So you ready? Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to look after my voice. I'm trying to just make sure that the passion doesn't. Scripture captures this and says they were like dead men. I can only imagine that's a posh way of saying they fainted. I don't know. I was like dead men. Are they praying freeze? So I suspect they fainted. So you have this earthquake. You have an angel rolling back the stone and sitting on the stone. And you have the guards so in awe of what has happened, so terrified that they become frozen. I believe they fainted. That wasn't in scripture, but that's just what I'm adding. And so then you have a group of women who before the sun rises are getting ready some spices. We know that Mary Magdalene is with them. We know that Mary, the mother of James, is with them. And they are preparing spices to go and anoint the body of Jesus. And so before the sun rises, they get to the tomb only to discover that it is not only open, but it is empty. And honestly, I can only imagine the panic that has just come over them. So much so that Mary Magdalene, who's with them, runs from the tomb, and she goes and fetches the disciples. She goes and fetches John and Peter, we know specifically. And while she leaves, the other women who are there with her, because she's come with a group with spices, they look inside the tomb. And as they look inside the tomb, they see an angel. They see an angel sitting at the feet where the feet of Jesus would have been, and they see an angel sitting at the head where Jesus' head would have been. And they see some folded linen. Now, I've got to be honest, guys, I don't iron my sheets. I don't know what. No judgment, please. These are sheets still ironed and looking crisp. So thank you, Mom. But they look inside the tomb and they see these angels and they see the linen that was once wrapped around Jesus' body, all neatly folded. I know it seems like a weird thing for me to focus on, but Scripture captures the fact that that linen was folded. And I'm going to come back to it in a minute. And the angels say to the group of women, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead?" I wonder, when you are overwhelmed, when you don't know what to do, where there is disorder in your life, are you going to dead things to look for answers for life? And the angels stop them in their track and say, "He is not here. He was crucified and he's risen. Remember, he has taught you this." And they start to recall to them all the things that Jesus told these. This was not a surprise, yet they were taken by surprise. And as the angels start to remind them of what Jesus has taught, they remember. I honestly believe, as disciples, as followers of Jesus, we have to apply what Jesus has taught to how we think, to our expectations, to our comings and our goings, to our everyday life. They had a head knowledge of something, but their heart hadn't received it yet. When the angels remind them and say, "Jesus taught you this, do you remember?" that should have changed their actions. They went there looking for a body. Now, I have really thought about whether to tell you this next story, because it is not to shock you. But I can only be myself, and I can only share with you how God has impacted my life. And this is the power of my story. When I was in my early 20s, I used to work in a nursing home. And one of my jobs would have been that when one of the residents that I was taking care of passed away, it would be my job to prepare the body for when the family would come and say their last goodbyes. And so I would wash them and I would clothe them and get them ready so the family could come and spend those last minutes with them before they were taken. And let me tell you, it is when I first saw a body with no life that I knew that there was a God, and his name was Jesus. Because the Lord is spirit. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And so when I saw a body with no spirit, I knew that to be absent from the body is to be with God. And you can't convince me otherwise. And here they are, they're looking for a body. But the angels are saying, he has risen. And so at this stage, they then leave, just overjoyed, overwhelmed, full of peace. And they go, the tomb was in a garden. And so I imagine they're now talking in the garden. And as they talk in the garden, Mary, Magdalene, who's gone off, remember, and got the disciples, she's returning. And we've got Peter and John. So it says that John got there first, so he must have been fitter. Come on, Peter. So he has a look in. He then comes out. And both Peter and John notice the folded clothing. They noticed that where his feet were was all the bedding, all the things that all the clothes that wrapped his body, and where his head was the face cloth that covered his face. And so you have these two piles of laundry. Why do these men notice the folded cloths? And as John looks at them, he says that he starts to realize the penny is starting to drop. He's risen. Let me tell you, as someone who has once been robbed, robbers do not fold linen. They don't. We were in Spain, and we had a motorhome, and we were on the beach. And the first moment we knew our motorhome had been robbed is because we started to see items of our clothing sprawled on the floor. And as we got closer and closer to the motorhome, we realized we'd been robbed. And all the things that sort of had just been once neatly folded were honestly, the motorhome was in chaos. They turned up beds and turned up pillows and emptied the fridge. Must have been hungry work. I don't know. But let me tell you, they were not tidy. In the midst He is the God of order, and he has even made his bed. I'm just saying, he is, like, that was for your parents. If you're trying to get your children to make their bed, that was for you for free. But Jesus has folded his clothing. He's folded those cloths because this was not a robbery. His body was not snatched. He has risen. He is in control. He has conquered death. He has put the past in its rightful place. He has ordered it. When you come and understand that the resurrected King is inviting you into a relationship, you don't suddenly have amnesia and don't have the past you had. But what he does is he puts it in its rightful order, so that you can leave it where it belongs in the past and move on in the victory that Jesus has for you. You can leave it there because he's dealt with it. It's in its rightful order. And so we have Peter and John returning to their homes. We have the woman at the grave, at the tomb. And we're going to pick this story up now as John just writes this conversation so beautifully. And so if we can have the scriptures up from John 20. Right. So Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene. Mary was standing outside the tomb crying. And as she wept, she stooped and she looked in. She saw the white-robed angels, one sitting at the head and the other at the foot of the place where the body of Jesus had been lying. And the angels say to her, "Dear woman, why are you crying?" the angels asked her. Now remember, she was not with the women that have spoken to the angels that are asked that question about why are you looking for the living among the dead. They've moved on, and she's now here having this private moment in the tomb. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" And this is her response. "Because they have taken away my Lord," she replied, "and I don't know where they have put him." She turned to leave and saw someone standing there. It was Jesus, but she didn't recognize him. Can I just say how bad her grief must have been, because she has gone to the tomb looking for Jesus, and Jesus is there in the garden, and she doesn't recognize him. Sometimes our chaos, our disorder can be so loud that we can't even see Jesus. We can't even see the wood for the trees. And here he is. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" She thought he was the gardener. So she said, if you have taken him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go and get him. Mary, said Jesus. She thinks he's the gardener. It just made me think of a garden right in the beginning of time where we lost our way as humanity, as humans. And here in the garden, Jesus says her name, Mary. Do you know, many people can say my name, but I thought to myself, when my mom says my name, 100 people could say my name, but when my mom says it, I recognize it instantly. It's like she puts an inference, she like kind of leans on certain vowels. I can't even tell you, but by her tone, I know 100 people could say my name. But if she said, Chevon, I know that the woman who brought me into this world just said my name. Now the creator, the creator of the heavens and earth has said, Mary. When God says your name, everything starts to make sense. Mary, Jesus said. She turned to him and cried, Rabboni, which in the Hebrew means teacher. Do you know what's funny is he says her name and immediately her posture is, you are the teacher, you are the truth bringer, and I am the learner, I am the student. For those of you who would say you are followers of Jesus, my question to you and to myself is, how good a student am I? Have I come into a relationship with teacher and student, and have I stopped learning? If you still believe exactly the same thing as when you first found Jesus, I want to encourage you to say we need to have a developing, a growing, a maturing belief of who he is. We need to have revelation after revelation, deep calling to deep. You can't possibly know everything there is to know about Jesus in one encounter. We need to be committed students. And she just postures and she says, Jesus, teacher. And he says, don't cling to me, Jesus said. Now, I thought, okay, listen, it's quite something to see a body that you thought would be dead now having life. She was looking for a dead body. She was even asking the gardener, who she thought was the gardener, where have you put him? And now this body, him. So he's like, okay, don't cling to me. And then he tells her why. But I love the fact she clung to him is in Scripture. Do you know why? Because this is not a vision of Jesus. This is not the spirit of Jesus. This is the person of Jesus. This is the resurrected King. She can cling to him. There's something to hold on. Later on, he appears to the disciples, and they touch his scars where the nails went in. This is not a mirage. This is not an image. This is not a vision. This is the person of Jesus resurrected. This is the power. This is the relationship that you and I are called into from the cross. But the life that we need to inhabit is understanding that he has risen. And therefore, the same power that conquered the grave lives in me. Greater is he who is in me. Come on, we need to know whose we are. I love this. Oh, don't cling to me, Jesus said, for I haven't yet ascended to the Father. But go find my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father, your Father, to my God, your God. What he's doing is he's reaffirming the relationship. So after saying her name, he's now saying the relationship is the foundation. He's reassuring her. So Mary Magdalene found the disciples and told them, I have seen the Lord. Then she gave them the message. Don't you love that? The story is just beautiful. Now, Mary goes and tells the disciples, but Jesus, there is still a group of women in the garden. Did you remember them? So they've spoken to the angels. Do you remember? They've seen the linen folded. They've been told, don't look for the living among the dead. And Jesus finds them on the road. He finds them in the garden. And he says to them, greetings. As if that was just like an everyday thing, just seeing the resurrected Jesus. I love, he's so casual, like greetings. They were so in awe with meeting Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, that they fell down and worshiped him. It says that they clung to his feet and worshiped. It started with a group of women going to a tomb, wanting to anoint the body of Jesus. This wasn't the correct worship because they were looking for something dead. And then Jesus corrects them. And as they worship, their life is ordered again. And they are now correctly worshiping the living God. They are correctly worshiping the living Jesus. And so they hold on his feet and they start to worship. Now, I read a book. Now, I do have some books on my shelf that have some cracking titles. And this book that I have read, and I would say to you, there's some books I'm going to recommend to you today. I'll do it now before I forget. If you are new to faith, or if you want to read something that's going to help you, secure you in the foundational truths of who Jesus is, I can't recommend this book enough. It's called Jesus Christ, the Truth, and it's by J.J. John. And so it is super easy to read and super simple, but honestly, it contains, I think a great teacher makes something complex very simple. And so it has powerful truth put simply. I'll leave it at the hub so that you can get a hold of it. So, and you can just note down the name and order it. So honestly, it's actually a lot of what I used to study for today's message. But I have another book that I read. I didn't write it. And it's by Edward Welsh, and it's called A Banquet at the Grave. I know, catchy title. Come read some of my books, great. Now this book is changed the way I think. And so although I've kind of read it in snippets, because honestly, one page, and I'm like, okay, I need some relaxation after that punch. But it has addressed some things where there's disorder. Essentially, the book looks at addictions. Now, often when we hear the word addictions, we'll think of substance addiction, whether it be alcohol or drugs or whatever. We might even think of activities that we would class as addictions, whether it be gambling or pornography. But you know what? We can all, and I believe we can all be susceptible to addictive type behaviors. Who has a thought pattern that they really don't want to think those types of thoughts, yet they find themselves still thinking that way? Who has like an addiction to work and success? Our addictions, and this is what this book really says, is addictions are ultimately a disorder of worship. All addictions. And I would actually surmise that in my own language of saying, wherever there is disorder in your life, it is because there is not an order of worship. So where there is a disorder, so if you're not thinking and speaking kindly to yourself, it's because you haven't got the order of worship of understanding that you are a child of God. Where there is a disorder of being fearful of what people think about you, it is because there is a disorder of worship that we value what people think of us more than what God says about us. When we push ourselves to work in such a way that it's damaging to our families, yet we keep doing it because the security of work and provision is greater than the provision we find in God. It is a disorder of worship. And what I find here at the tomb and at the grave is Jesus is bringing a rightful order to worship. Don't worship the dead things that can't give you life. When you put Jesus on the throne of your life, when you make Jesus the head of everything, let me tell you what was chaotic and everyone's running around, they meet Jesus, they worshiping, and everything makes sense. their feet. They've now got clarity. He orders their steps. They go to Galilee. He meets them. They have breakfast. Everything starts to tumble as it should when we have the rightful worship in its rightful place.